Capcom's output on the Sega Saturn was nothing short of legendary. One of the most prolific third parties for the system, the game maker brought some of the best arcade ports of its era to the console. More often than not, these ports were better on Saturn than on competing systems. While the Saturn lacked Capcom's home console exclusives, like the latter Resident Evils and the Mega Man Legends games, they made up for it with genre-defining arcade-perfect ports of their best fighting games. The Street Fighter Alpha series, Cyberbots, the Versus games, the list goes on. Most of these stayed in Japan, but you can't deny the mileage that Capcom got out of the system, even after companies, including Sega themselves, jumped ship to more powerful platforms. Capcom was one of the few companies that made the most out of the Saturn's RAM expansion cards, even including them as packed-in requirements for some of their fighting games. One of the company's most impressive efforts was their port of Street Fighter Alpha 3, a game that also saw a port on the Dreamcast, but many consider the Saturn version to be superior, thanks to the RAM expansion. Street Fighter Alpha 3 was such a late release for the console that Sega had already abandoned it by that point. Capcom could have left it at that as their swan song for the console, going out with a bang. But they didn't. Instead, they went out with a whimper.
Final Fight Revenge!
Final Fight Revenge was released into Japanese arcades in 1999. The game is a 3D one-on-one fighting game featuring characters from throughout the Final Fight series. Upon its release, it was the first new Final Fight game released in arcade since the original back in 1989, a full 10-year gap. The game was developed by Capcom USA for the Sega Titan Video Arcade System, or STV for short. Given the ease of porting STV games to the Saturn, Final Fight Revenge naturally saw a home port to the Saturn. In March of 2000. Yes, you heard me right. Final Fight Revenge was released well into the life cycle of the Sega Dreamcast. Not only was this Capcom's final game for the system, but it was also the very last officially licensed game released for the Sega Saturn. I just find it kind of funny that an American team made the very last Sega Saturn game, and it only released in Japan, never mind that the final Saturn game in North America came out in 1998. Anyways, the game offers an arcade mode, a 2-player versus mode, and that's it. You've got an options menu to tinker with some settings, but in terms of game modes, there's really nothing else here. Not even a training mode to get acquainted with the characters. Let's talk about those characters, at least the game isn't a slouch here. There's 10 playable characters to choose from, including series mainstays Cody, Guy, and Hagar. All the other characters are the henchmen baddies you see throughout the series, like Andor or Poison. Some of these characters already saw screen time as fighters in the Street Fighter Alpha series, but don't expect their movesets to fully carry over. It's not too bad though, you get to control these characters in a new unique way, and things like special moves should feel familiar to most players. Speaking of the controls, this game is technically a 6-button fighter, but not in the traditional Street Fighter sense. The game has 4 standard attack buttons, a light and hard punch, and a light and hard kick. One button is pretty much a dedicated taunt button, but the last button is used as a sidestep and an interact button. That latter function is used for the game's most unique feature, usable items. In the vein of the original Final Fight games, you can pick up and use weapons scattered around the arenas. You got melee weapons, guns, grenades, as well as larger items like crates and barrels. The weapons add some fun variety to the fighting, and the larger items can act as obstacles in the middle of the fight, as well as being picked up and thrown. Throwing items can be just as useful. Got an empty gun? Just throw it right at your opponent. Some characters even start out with weapons as part of their movesets, and like any other weapon, those can be knocked out of their hands and used by their opponent. You can even hold multiple weapons and cycle through them as you see fit. As for the fighting itself, it can feel a bit stiff and clunky at times. It's not a slow game, but combat has a bit of an awkward pace to it. It's hard to describe without playing it yourself. I definitely wouldn't compare it to other 3D Capcom fighters like the Rival Schools games. It doesn't feel nearly as polished as those. While it may be clunky to play, I still think there's some fun to be had here. It's fairly simple to adapt to, and honestly I ended up having a pretty great time playing it. The best way I can really describe this game is that it's endearing. It doesn't try especially hard, it's not super polished, and it's not the most graphically intensive thing out there, but it's got charm. Speaking of those graphics, they're nothing to write home about, but they get the job done. It is kinda wild that this game requires the 4 meg RAM card to play. There are plenty of other 3D fighters that look and feel better than this that don't require the RAM card. At least the steady 60 FPS is a nice touch. Final Fight Revenge does not have the best reputation. Most mentions I see of this game paint it in an incredibly harsh and negative light. And after playing it, I do see why. You have a developer like Capcom who's put out some of the best fighting games of all time, and they churn out this game from an unproven development studio in the US. Even Shinji Mikami has voiced his dissatisfaction with this game. If I played this when it was new, yeah, I think I'd be pretty upset by it when compared to what I expect from Capcom. Its lack of modes and polish hold this game back pretty hard, but I have to say I really enjoyed my time playing this. I'd honestly put this game favorably alongside something like, I don't know, Golden Axe the Duel. It's a pretty fun fighting game with some unique quirks, but it doesn't stand a chance with the other top tier fighters on the Saturn. It fits in a nice little niche on the system for a fighting game that's not great but certainly not bad either. Unfortunately, a game being not great but not bad isn't good enough to be worth hundreds of dollars on the secondhand market. Yeah, this game is not cheap and definitely not worth the money. You will be disappointed by it in that sense. But if you've got your own alternative means of playing it, then yeah, give it a shot. I personally think it's pretty fun. Just don't go in expecting Capcom's best from the Saturn's last gasp.